He's digging himself an ever deeper hole. The point about this, James, we'll talk about the BBC in just a little while, which has certainly got, as usual, a lot of questions to answer. But with Gregg Wallace, you know, I used to be a TV critic. I know the stories about Gregg Wallace. So a lot of people are saying, oh, this is wokery gone mad. I accept that, you know, and if he was just the kind of guy who told a few, you know, risque jokes in the office, then that's too much to cancel him and all that. I hope he doesn't get cancelled, but I think he will, because I don't like cancellation. But I know for a fact that these bawdy remarks, these jokes he told, quite often left young girls very upset, crying, that kind of thing. So before we just say, oh, come on, snowflakes, remember that. I know the allegation is, and you know, I've heard this before, that with his sex talk, he upsets young women in particular. That's the allegation. He, of course, denies it, says he hasn't done anything wrong. But all in all, you know, I would say it'd be very unlikely we'll see him back on MasterChef, and I very much doubt if we'll ever see him on television again, to be honest with you, because he's broken the woke laws, and that's that. But from what one hears, the allegations anyway, if the allegations are true, he kind of deserves this. But what about the BBC? Will they ever learn? You know, Jimmy Savile, Hugh Edwards, Rolf Harris, Russell Brand, list goes on. Powerful male stars who they are told about time and time again, and they just brush it under the carpet and don't do anything about it. BBC was warned, it emerged today, 4 times, dating back to December 2010, about this guy's alleged behaviour. I've got to stress, he says he hasn't done anything wrong. His lawyers say that. But they have been warned about his alleged behaviour dating back to 2010 4 times. We've had Kirsty Walk come forward, Kirsty Allsop, and the list goes on of women just coming forward saying, no, he was inappropriate. He made inappropriate. Ulrika Johnson said he made a rape joke to her. Ulrika Johnson, bless her heart, is a rape victim. Is that appropriate? He was accused of making kung fu noises to an Asian contestant, and so on and so forth. All of which, you know, in today's culture is not acceptable. The BBC is told 4 times. I suspect more. And they go, so the BBC is now saying, it's unfair to say we didn't do anything. We did. We spoke to him 4 times. Oh, yeah, well, that was really effective, wasn't it? So, in other words, what did they say on the 4th time? Listen, we've told you 3 times. This is the 4th time. We don't really want to have to tell you this again. In other words, they were completely ineffective. Yet again, they let the powerful man carry on with his alleged misbehaviour. This is what they do time and time again.
Yeah, and it's a bit rich, the BBC, sort of smug BBC, who portray themselves as sort of self-satisfied arbiters of the truth and, you know, common sense and, you know, respectfulness and, you know, establishment and doing the right thing. It's good old BBC. But BBC are not getting in front of situations. They're lurking in the shadows, and then stories grow. And then there's accusations of cover-up, and why weren't they on top of this? And as a taxpayer to the BBC, we need to be asking these questions, because there's so many different examples. The same, as you touched on, the same pattern happens over and over again. Now, going on to Gregg Wallace, you know, the world has changed. You know, you've gone up to the Fleet Street generation. I've 20, 30 years in advertising. You know, I remember what it was like back in the 90s. Now, it's completely different, in inverted commas, banter in the workplace. The world has changed. There things, you know, you've got to be careful what you say. And Gregg Wallace, as something, you know, from my point of view, someone who specialises in giving advice and communications to clients, what he's done the last 2 days is a catastrophe for him. You know, he's done this, you know, made the situation much, much worse. What he should have done, he said, what he should have said, you know what, I come from a time and place where I'm old school, and some of the things that I've said, I deeply regret, I apologise. I'm sorry. That's what you should have said.
Yeah.
But he didn't. He's made it a lot worse. Combined with the BBC making it worse, because they're behind the story again. And so therefore people go, well, what is the governance of the BBC? Considering the BBC on one hand like to give off the impression that they are, you know, the bastions of all things good in broadcasting society and reputation, yet they're constantly getting sort of bogged down in reputational damage because they're not being transparent. They're not getting on top of the story. They're not informing the public about where they are and what, you know, what their procedure is until it's after the story.
Also, James, if you have, you know, they say, well, they go, oh, you know, people say we didn't take action. That's not true. We did take action. We spoke to him 4 times. Well, you know, that's not exactly action, is it? I mean, it sounds to me as if they basically said, hey, Greg, you've been a bit of a naughty boy. Come on, tone it down a bit. In effect, if you speak to somebody 4 times about the same kind of complaint, you know, sexual behaviour, sexual jokes, sexual innuendo that's upsetting young women in particular, female contestants. If you do that 4 times, that's not taking action. That's a lack of action. That is letting him carry on with it. You know, look, 4 times. We don't want to have to make this a 5th time, Greg. They've done this. They do this time and time again, and they shouldn't be able to wriggle out of this. As I say, I know what a lot of our audience think. They think, oh, come on, this is wokery gone mad, snowflakery. And, you know, usually I'd be the first one jumping to Gregg Wallace's defence because I don't like this snowflakery, you know, the fact you can't even tell a dirty joke in the office or anything like that. But I know what he stands accused of. He denies it, but he stands accused not only of telling racy jokes, making racy comments, but leaving the women who he told these jokes to traumatised and upset. And young girls, you know, young pretty girls crying and stuff. You know, that's not right. That isn't right.
Yeah, exactly. It's about, we share a lot of similar views on the freedom of speech thing, Kevin. You know, I'm all for freedom of speech. You know, you can't stop people saying what they want to say and how they say it. But freedom of speech also has the important caveat of the freedom of consequences. And so we're in a different world now to what we were when we talked, you know, take the 90s and the 80s and so on. And so the debate has changed. The style of, you know, conversations changed, especially in the workplace. And so that has to be taken into account. It's not about, this one isn't actually about cancel culture. It's about governance of the BBC and why they're constantly behind the story. It's about, you know, Gregg Wallace sort of badly handling his own PR on this. But it's also a debate about freedom of speech in 2 ways. You know, some of the things that, and again, it's just allegations. You know, we've got to see how that, you know, what's the due diligence and the process on that. But there is a debate that if you want to have freedom of speech, you've got to allow the person on the receiving end of that who feels that this is, you know, out of order, they're entitled to their freedom of speech to express that as well. And that can't be forgotten about. So normally I'm the same as you, Kevin. I think there's a little bit woke, there's a cancel culture, witch hunt and so on. But I think it's more nuanced than that with this. It's about all aspects of debate about what can and cannot be said, the opportunity for people to say what they want, but also the understanding that people don't like what someone says, then they have that opportunity to say that as well. And meanwhile, you've got the BBC for quite a long period of time.
The problem is, James, the BBC never does really give the victims, the alleged victims, their chance to speak. They got a friend of mine, was a young, good-looking guy working at the BBC in the newsroom some years ago. Guess what? Receiving lots and lots of suggestive pictures from Hugh Edwards, to the extent, like, why don't we meet in a hotel? Why don't we do this? Why don't we do this? Here's a picture of me. Here's a picture. To the extent that my friend, in the end, in exasperation, went to HR and said, look, can you get him to stop doing this? You know, I want to put a complaint in here. And he was told, it's Hugh Edwards. Are you sure you want to proceed with this? That's what the state broadcaster has always done. It protects the powerful star at the expense of their alleged victims, and it doesn't seem to have learned a lesson. Let's see. For me, though, this is encouraging, this situation, because it doesn't look to me as if Gregg Wallace will be back on television at all, but certainly not on MasterChef, and that will at least rid us of the most irritating man who has ever been on television. You got 2 minutes. That is lovely, lovely, lovely. Now, why MasterChef? I mean, he is just an irritating man. So if he does go, it won't be a moment too soon.